It had been 3 weeks since Cora was expelled from Starling Academy, and the dorm room Stella once shared with her best friend felt emptier than ever. She tried to focus on her studies, to carry on after everything that had happened, but it was a struggle, especially because Cora had refused to speak with her before her parents took her away. And she wouldn't accept any of Stella's repeated holocalls, let alone respond to her holotexts. Of course, Stella couldn't exactly blame her. Stella was the one who had gone to Lady Astrid to tell her about the accident at the negative energy facility, after all. Even though it would have been discovered eventually, thanks to the Starvalence Glameras, Stella still couldn't help feeling that she was to blame for Cora's getting expelled. She had genuinely intended to let the whole thing go, as she and Cora had discussed. But Cora had been asleep for so long after they'd returned from the negative energy facility, she hadn't even gone to any of her classes that day, and Stella couldn't stop thinking about that cloud of negative energy. She had desperately tried one last time to rouse Cora from sleep, hoping to convince her that reporting the leak would be the right thing to do. But Cora was in such a deep slumber that waking her had proved impossible. Fearing that it would soon be too late to contain the negative energy, and that it might endanger Starland, Stella felt she had no choice but to report it to Lady Astrid without Cora. Once the headmistress confirmed the details of the negative energy leak by accessing the Starvalence footage, Stella felt that she had to confess to all the events leading up to that moment, as well, including her unauthorized trip down to Wishworld with Cora. Stella knew that she and Cora would both get in trouble, but she never expected that Cora would be expelled. If only Cora had confessed when Lady Astrid had given her the chance, perhaps she would still be there at Starling Academy. But now she was gone. Cora had been right, their lives, or at least Cora's life, appeared to be ruined. Stella shook her head and collapsed in tears on Cora's bed as all the plans they'd made began to flood her mind. They were supposed to graduate together. They were going to get their dream jobs, hers as a wish scientist and Cora's as an actor, and live next door to each other. And they would go on wish-granting missions together. But now the perfect future they'd envisioned seemed completely out of reach, and Stella had never felt more alone. She buried her face in Cora's pillow, which still had a lingering hint of her best friend's sparkle scent, and continued to sob. What if she never got to see her best friend again? No. There had to be a way to make things right, but it would require Lady Astrid's help. So Stella slowly got up from the bed and wiped away her tears, and within a few minutes, she was knocking at the door to the headmistress's office. "Come in," said Lady Astrid as the silver door slid open. "Stella, how nice to see you. I've been meaning to check on you, but things have been quite busy around here." "Oh, that's okay," Stella replied with a pained smile. "Please have a seat," Lady Astrid commanded, extending her arm in a grand gesture toward the same purple chair where Stella had sat a few weeks earlier. "What can I do for you?" "Well," Stella began, "I was wondering if you'd heard anything about Cora, if you knew how she was doing." "Ah." The headmistress nodded and drew in her breath. "I haven't been able to get a hold of her parents, but I'm sure they would have contacted me if there was a problem." "Oh. That's good." Stella was relieved to hear that and felt her friend must be okay. When Cora hadn't taken any of her holocalls or responded to her holotexts, a small part of Stella worried that something awful had happened to her, although she of course realized it probably had more to do with Cora's being angry with her. And the negative energy that escaped from the facility? Do you know what happened to it? Yes, Lady Astrid replied with a comforting smile. The counter-negative unit was called in and they did indeed manage to capture and contain it. Really? That's wonderful. Stella felt the weight of everything that had happened began to lift. Now she was more certain than ever that she could enlist Lady Astrid's help in making things right with Cora. "So are you going to let Cora come back to school?" The headmistress widened her eyes in shock. "Oh, dear, no. I'm afraid that won't be possible." "But why not?" Stella frowned. "Please, Lady Astrid. Cora is one of the kindest and most generous starlings I've ever known, and she was truly trying to help. Everything she did came from the most positive place." Lady Astrid's face softened with sympathy. I know it may seem that way to you, and accidents certainly do happen, but it is how we respond to those accidents that shows our true nature, the headmistress explained. Unfortunately, one might argue that all of Cora's actions were in fact quite selfish, as noble as she may have believed her intentions to be, and at the very least. Much of what she did following each mistake was motivated by a selfish desire to protect herself rather than others. That was clearly demonstrated when I offered her the chance to confess, and she didn't take it. It seemed like there was no way Lady Astrid was going to change her mind. Stella stared down at the purple star in the center of the sparkly gold rug and blinked back her tears. She wished Cora had just been honest about what had happened, and didn't understand why her friend had been so cold and distant when Lady Astrid called her into the office. However, the headmistress continued, I must say that I am more impressed with you than ever before. Not only did you take a risk by coming to tell me what happened at the negative energy facility and during your trip to Wishworld, but you continue to put others before yourself. As demonstrated by your efforts to help Cora yet again. You are a truly special girl, Stella. I hope you know that. Stella inhaled deeply and struggled to smile through her tears. The kind words from Lady Astrid should have made her feel at least a bit better, but instead they made her head throb with the same intense, painful guilt that had plagued her ever since Cora had been expelled. But then it occurred to her that if Lady Astrid held Stella in such high regard, there had to be some way for her to get through to the headmistress. To make her see how desperately Stella needed her best friend back. Thank you, Lady Astrid, she replied before attempting one final plea. But I still can't help feeling like I was at least partly to blame for some of what happened. And I'm not sure how I'm ever going to live with myself if I can't find a way to reach Cora and get her to forgive me. Please, isn't there anything you can do? The headmistress shook her head sadly and pressed her hands together as she brought her fingertips to her lips, briefly closing her eyes before staring directly into Stella's. I wish that I could, she said. But it's quite simply out of my hands, and I suppose the time has come for me to tell you why. However, what I'm about to reveal must be held in the strictest of confidence and not shared with anyone. Especially Cora. Stella felt like she'd been punched in the stomach, the breath knocked out of her completely. What could Lady Astrid possibly want to tell her, and why couldn't Cora know about it? Okay. She barely managed to whisper. You see, Stella, I recently happened upon an oracle, an ancient text that spoke of the first time negative energy would be released into the Starland atmosphere, the headmistress said. Oh, my goodness, you did? Stella gasped. Yes, Lady Astrid replied with a contemplative smile. In fact, the prophecy specifically said that 2 starlings would take a forbidden trip to Wishworld, and that the negative energy would be released as a result of that journey. Stella's head continued to throb as she tried to process what the headmistress was telling her. It was almost impossible to believe. How could it be that everything she and Cora had done had been foretold, that their journey to Wishworld had already been written in the stars and they had simply been fulfilling their destinies? However, Lady Astrid continued, the oracle also stated that only one of the starlings would be responsible for the release of the negative energy, while the other would be responsible for stopping its spread, in effect, for saving Starland. Really? Stella replied, her eyes widening with a mix of fear and reluctant pride as the magnitude of her part in the prophecy sunk in. It said that? It did. The headmistress nodded. I see. Stella swallowed hard and pressed her lips together to stop them from trembling. Now that Cora has been stopped and the negative energy has been contained, I cannot possibly allow her to return to Starling Academy, Lady Astrid said. To do so would directly undermine the prophecy, and truly, given all of her offenses, I believe that she is in fact getting off quite easy. Do you understand? I think so, Stella replied. Good, Lady Astrid concluded. But Stella didn't see anything good about it. All she knew was that she needed to take some time to think about everything she'd just learned. It still didn't seem fair that she got to stay at Starling Academy while Cora had to be expelled. And although she realized that she had to do as Lady Astrid said and keep what she just learned in confidence, She remained convinced that she needed to find a way to reach Cora, to somehow make things right between the two of them. Because no matter what the ancient oracle had predicted and no matter how different their destinies might appear to be in that moment, Stella refused to accept that she had lost her best friend forever. If there was any way for her to somehow realign their stars, she would find it.